Hey guys, it's Paul and welcome back to my channel. I have my bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a minor in psychology, and I'm going to say that for the next 95 videos because I am just so proud of myself. I'm also a board member of the Voices for the Silence nonprofit. It's an organization that's helping the missing person cases in West Virginia either get resources such as reels being made to share their story or getting searches done, putting billboards up. It's actually really cool. So I'll link the Facebook down below, that way you can join. And I'll also put the Instagram. And today we are here with a new Valencrime. And this one, ironically enough, tried to get linked to the Gabby and Laundrie case. So I thought we could just kick off Valencrime with this one. And the one we're covering today is the murders of Kylen Schulte and Crystal Turner. There's honestly just more information about Kylen and her family out here, so we're just going to go ahead and start with her. Kylen was born September 5th, 1996, and at the time of her murder, she was 24 years old. She grew up in Wolf Point and Billings, Montana, but she also lived in Vail, Colorado at some point. Her parents are Sean Paul and Valeria, and she has a younger brother, Mackie, that's her best friend. And honestly, the whole family was really close. She had green eyes and beautiful dreaded brown hair and a bright smile. She was very laid back. She lived the hippie lifestyle. She tried to be as positive as could be all the time, made people laugh. She just enjoyed life, and she was very spiritual. She had a very strong faith in God, and she was just known as a ray of sunshine. She loved crystals and butterflies and her bunny. Oh my gosh, she took that bunny everywhere. She was an artist at heart, a skilled welder, and she also painted rocks. Her parents divorced as a kid, and her dad did end up moving to Montana. Her mom remarried a man named Kyle, and they also had 2 kids, Marlo and Xander. Her brother Mackie was shot and killed when he was young on May 17th, 2015 at 2:30 a.m. He was only 15. What happened was Mackie and his friend went and knocked on this other friend's window, and of course it was at night, so it really scared the guy, and without even looking, he just shot whoever was out there. He thought someone was trying to break in, so it never even occurred to him it could have been Mackie and his friend. And the bullet hit Mackie directly in the head. And after this, Kylen was pregnant at one point with a baby girl, but the baby girl died soon after she was born. So after all this trauma, Kylen just had to get away. Mackie was her best friend, and then she loses her daughter too. She needed a new start. So she moved to Montana with her dad, and then they moved to Moab. And when they moved to Moab, she really started to just put roots in the ground there and got a job at the Moonflower Co-op. And you might remember the Moonflower Co-op because that's where the 911 call rang in to report Brian hitting Gabby in their van.
Grant County Sheriff's Office.
Hi, I'm calling. I'm right on the corner of Main Street by Moonflower, and we're driving by, and I'd like to report a domestic dispute. Florida with the white van, Florida license plate, white land, gentleman,
Where's
about
it at?
5-6 years. They just drove off. They're going down Main Street. They made a right onto Main Street from Moonflower.
Or what were they doing?
Cooperative, but we drove by, and the gentleman was slapping the girl.
He was slapping her?
Yes, and then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk. He proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove off.
All right, I will let somebody know. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Bye.
Thanks.
So let's switch directions and start talking about Crystal. Crystal was born December 30th, 1982, and at the time of her murder, she was 38. And she was originally from Hot Springs, Arkansas. She was blonde and petite and very tomboyish. She was super smart, though, and had lots of energy. She was so kind and always smiling. She just had an absolute blast in life too. She did hold a tough exterior, but once those walls were breaking down, she was just an amazing, giving, kind person underneath. But she could fight if she needed to. She loved motorcycles, especially anything Harley Davidson, and she loved steak. Her dad died when she was a kid. He was only 40. And her mom remarried a guy named Dennis. And throughout her siblings, she had a brother and 2 half-brothers that ended up passing away once they were adults. So she was having a lot of death around this time too. She did have a son and 2 daughters from a previous marriage, but they still lived in Arkansas. And Crystal lived in Moab for 6 years before Kylen had gotten there or they had met. She worked at McDonald's there, and at this point, it was just destiny for them to meet. In about 2017-2018, they had met while they were hiking. Kylen was having a really hard time with this move because it was hard for her to make friends, still trying to deal with all this trauma, and her mental health was just not well at this point. And so meeting Crystal really changed that for her, and they did end up working together at the La Quinta Inn and Suites at some point. When Kylen met Crystal, everything changed. She just started seeing so much more positivity. She was getting back to her loving life lifestyle. She said sparks flew immediately, and Kylen's dad was thrilled to see his daughter just so incredibly happy. She had told her dad that she felt courageous and safe with Crystal and that she just had never been happier. And she did end up telling him that moving to Moab saved her life. And many people knew Crystal and Kylen around Moab. Their beam of light of a relationship was hard not to notice. And in 2019, they officially became a couple. They did bond over their traumas of their past, and they were just deeply in love, and people even explained them as inspiring. And them being free spirits was something they also bonded over. And Sean Paul even got close to Crystal. He loved Crystal like another daughter. He could not deny how happy Crystal made Kylen, so how could he feel any type of way about her? And both families were really supportive of this relationship because, like I said, they had never been happier. They ended up getting married on April 20th, 2021 in a glass treehouse in Arkansas, and guys, it was beautiful. They did do van life. They had a van that they converted into a place they could live. They would usually leave it at the McDonald's parking lot if they were staying with somebody, but if they camped, that's what they lived in. They also had a Kia Sorento and a Harley Davidson that they would in fact park at the McDonald's parking lot when they weren't using them too. They stayed in the mountains a lot. That was pretty much their favorite place to go. They learned to be self-sufficient really fast with like no running water, no electricity, anything fancy like that. They stayed in contact with their friends and family as much as they could, but of course if they were staying in the mountains, sometimes they didn't have signal, but they never went more than a few days. And her pet rabbit Ruth camped with them also. They were with her all the time. So they were staying in the LaSalle Mountains the last time they were seen. They had a site in the South Mesa area off the LaSalle Loop Road. Their campsite was just literally woods, no running water, no electricity, very little cell service, and it was just completely isolated. Now, Sean Paul has mentioned that Kylen did talk about them thinking about moving campgrounds. They said there was a creeper guy that was really freaking them out. It seemed like he was trying to make them uncomfortable and intimidated, and it just did not sit well with Kylen. She said that her and Crystal were just in their hammock and this guy pulled up. He got out of the car and howled like a wolf, so Crystal just howled right back and he drove off. But later, he came back and he set up his camp like super close to them and just kept trying to pick at them to move because that was their campground. And Kylen ended up telling people, if something happens to us, we were murdered. So on August 13th, 2021, Kylen and Crystal were seen at a bar called Woody's. They were out to celebrate Kylen's soon-to-be birthday. And they were semi-regulars here, like coming in like once or twice a month, but they weren't big drinkers, so there was no need to go to the bar really any more than that. And of course, witnesses have said they looked deeply in love, and the attention was mainly on each other, but they were there with friends, so they were hanging out with people. And they talked about the type of cake that they were going to get Kylen for her birthday, but they also did bring up this creeper guy that was at their campground. But honestly, at the bar, they seemed a lot more annoyed than scared, and it was just such an inconvenience for them. But they said the next day they were going to move campgrounds and it was going to be no big deal. Almost jokingly, they were telling their friends, hey, if we don't show up for work, come look for us. And they left around 9 p.m. And with security footage and witnesses, it definitely didn't seem like anybody followed them from the bar. So just keep that in mind. Now, there are rumors that they possibly went to a friend's house after this, but nothing has been able to confirm that. But if they did, it was still pretty chill, and they left around midnight. So on August 14th, 2021, Kylen and Crystal took their Harley Davidson from their campground down to McDonald's to switch out for the Kia. And that's really the last time they were ever seen. On August 15th, they both ended up missing work, and it just was not like them. They were very responsible when it came to jobs, and this really freaked out their employees. And this also made their friends and family really worried. So they ended up reporting them missing on the 16th, and it was Crystal's manager that did it. Police were searching, friends and family were posting on Facebook, and there was just no sign of them at the local hospitals, the jails. Nothing. There's no sign of Crystal and Kylen. So I want to introduce someone named Cindy Sue Hunter. At the time, she was 64 years old of all of this, but she met Sean Paul and Kylen because she owned an art gallery, and Sean Paul ended up buying some paintings from her, and they just became really close. They were some of her first customers, so she held them near and dear to their heart, and she was a somewhat mother figure for Kylen being in Moab. So on August 18th, 2021, when there's still absolutely no sign of Crystal and Kylen, Cindy received a phone call from Sean Paul telling her what was going on. So she volunteered to go help look for her. She drove to McDonald's where they said the last time they saw them, but they had told her Crystal hadn't been there for 3 days, and that it was really starting to worry her coworkers. So she knew they were camping at the LaSalle Mountains, so she started driving up there around 7 a.m. She went early, and she drove around the LaSalle Mountains for 4 hours. She would stop anybody she saw showing pictures of Kylen and Crystal, and no one really knew what happened or who they were. She did go up towards the South Mesa area, and this is when she saw something silver, so she kind of backed up and went down this road, and it ended up being their Kia Sorento. She looked around the campsite, and it didn't seem like it was destroyed, but you could tell someone probably went through it. There were sports drinks littered on the campsite, and as you know, Kylen was a very hippie heart, so she did not like littering at all. Their clothes were under a tree, which was just odd to see, and the tent wasn't set up like in position anymore. It was kind of tilted, I guess, and the door was open. So there was one cell phone propped in the tent, but each girl had a cell phone, so that meant one was missing. She did end up finding Kylen's rabbit in her carrier next to the Kia Sorento, and that's when she really knew something was wrong. She wouldn't just keep her rabbit locked up like that all the time. So she got in the car and called the police. Well, of course, after calling the police, she calls Sean Paul and tells him what she found. And she did end up getting out of the car again to kind of look around more. And she was was trying to kind of describe what she was seeing to Sean Paul. And this is when she saw something in the creek. She said it looked like a body was partially out of the water, and it did end up being Kylen. And I just can't even imagine how to handle that situation, knowing she was on the phone with Kylen's dad. Now, Crystal was found a little bit farther down the creek, but not by Cindy. Cindy freaked right out when she saw Kylen, right? So it is thought that maybe Crystal was trying to run away from whatever happened, and that's why she was farther down. She then got off the phone with Sean Paul and called the police again to tell them what she found. And she told them she really feared for their safety, so could they hurry up? This is why she did not even consider looking for Crystal, and she told them that. Like, nope. After I saw Kylen, I'm done. So these girls were undressed from the waist down, which of course hinted towards possible sexual assault. And one of them had their bra pulled up, that way their breasts were exposed, and the other one was only in a tank top. Both had gunshot wounds in the back, the sides, and I think only one of them had it in the chest. And there were 4 9mm bullets that were found around the girls. So at the scene there was their Kia Sorento, the camping tent, like long-term camping tools and supplies, a makeshift rabbit cage, and so it was pretty normal things for their campsites. On August 19th, 2021, Grand County Sheriff's Office did identify the girls as Crystal and Kylen, and they asked the public for assistance on this case. They wanted to know what anybody saw or what anybody knew about Kylen and Crystal. But they did announce that they did not believe there was current danger in society, even though they haven't caught this guy yet. So that didn't go over well with people in Moab. And because of this case, and then later on when we find out about Gabby Petitio's case in about 2 weeks, this society was in absolute uproar about what was happening in Moab. Like, what is happening? There are 2 girls that are murdered, and then a girl that had this awful body cam footage released of her after she has already went missing, and as we know now, dead. Due to all of this, they did bring the FBI and the Utah State Police in to work their case too. So there were some search warrants in September that were completed. They had a search warrant of any cell phone service that was in the area on August 13th through August 15th. They got a search warrant for Crystal's 1987 Ford Ecoline that I also forgot to mention. They had that too. And that was left in the parking lot at McDonald's like the rest of them. It was later towed, but they only really found personal documents and a Bible in her car. And Sean Paul ended up setting up a clue booth in Swanee Park in Moab. This was for tips from the public that might be too scared to go to the police themselves, or maybe don't trust the police, so they didn't want to go that route. It was just a way to be anonymous too. And Sean Paul sat at this clue booth every day for 5 weeks. So in October, a private investigator, Jason Jensen, he was able to get a list together of suspects. He was the co-founder of the Utah Cold Case Coalition, and he completely volunteered his services to Sean Paul. He was able to find out that they were both shot 6 times, so those casings they found weren't everything. And he claimed that this could be a hate crime. I mean, it is 2 women who are attracted to, clearly, women. And he just had a feeling that it had to do with them being gay. And by mid-October, that clue booth had gotten over 50 credible tips in it. Any tip he got, he immediately took to the police, even if he thought it was outrageous for them to check out. And at some point during this month, I think there was a Facebook group made for the justice of Kylen and Crystal. And by May 2022, they had over 10,000 members in that group. In November 2021, a local anonymous business company donated $10,000 for any information for Kylen and Crystal's death, in which a private lending company also offered $10,000 for a reward of any type of answers that lead to Crystal and Kylen's murders. But no tip that they got through this was helpful. So in December 2021, they started really looking into the types of bullets that were used. And they did start asking people in this area, if you heard any types of screams or ruckus or whatever, please come forward and tell us. And especially around noon on the 14th. There was a wedding going on in a cabin nearby, but it does seem that the cabin was just far enough away that they're really not sure, with all the music and loudness of a wedding, that anybody would notice. But there were rumors that maybe it was someone from this wedding that did this. So in January 2022, they did identify that they had a person of interest. They had found a blanket and a jacket near the girls' campsite, but by February, whoever was the owner of this blanket and jacket were ruled out. In March 2022, Jason Jensen did find audio recording around the crime scene where you could hear the gunshots that are thought to be what killed Crystal and Kylen in it. And you could also hear their screams. But the police claim they heard this audio and they don't hear the screams, but they do confirm they hear the gunshots. And this would fit around their timeline because this audio recording was at 11:35 a.m. on August 14th. The police do think it might have happened a little later than 11:35, but for the most part, it fits the timeline, right? So in May, most people were frustrated at the fact that there was really no progress on this case that they were releasing to the public. So there was a group of internet sleuths formed called the Cry Warriors, and they really started to dive into this case too. And these warriors were able to raise money for Sean Paul to be able to hang a billboard of Kylen and Crystal, asking for answers and posting the $20,000 reward on it just in time for it to hang through all of Moab's tourist season. And this really helped keep their story alive and actually grow bigger. And on May 8th, here comes Dog the Bounty Hunter once again in one of our cases. He did join the search and searched for a whole week. He arrived with a 10-person crew in Moab, but he is convinced that this person had to know them, and he had his thoughts on who it was. He did think it was also a possible hate crime because this was either a crime of love or hate, since there was just it was brutal. And he ended up receiving around 1,000 tips that he tried to look into every one of them. I'm just going to get this section out of the way. 2 days before these girls were reported missing, there was a 911 call that came in stating that Brian Laundrie was hitting Gabby Petitio in their van leaving the Moonflower Co-op. Of course, that is where Kylen worked, and because of this, when Kylen and Crystal were murdered, it was really thought that Brian Laundrie could have had something to do with it. And people to this day think they are linked, but unfortunately, it's just not possible. Of course, they were called on the police the day before they were murdered, and that does make people think that it is very possible it was Brian, right? But she wasn't working that day, so who knows if she ever even met Brian and Gabby. And in January 2022, they officially announced that there was absolutely no link between Brian Laundrie and Kylen and Crystal's murders. So even though that's a sexy theory, it's just not possible. If anybody is familiar with the case, we are going to now talk about Adam Pinkeschwitz. It's really hard to say his last name, so some people just refer to him as Adam Pincus. And he was 44 at the time of all this, and he was also a drifter that just lived van life. He does have a criminal history, he does have history of mental illness, and he does have history of homophobia. So this guy got on police radar fairly fast. He also worked with Crystal at McDonald's, but he never worked a shift with Crystal. But at work, he definitely picked on people that were lesbians. The manager was a lesbian, and he would claim that she gave special treatment to Crystal because they both were interested in women. There was one incident that Crystal came in during his shift to get a bag of ice and fix some food for her and Kylen.
My concern was about a guy by the name of Adam Pincus. It's not his. I'm not saying his last name right, okay?
Right.
So she came in one night, like she always did, and she wanted a bag of ice and she wanted to make her own food, which we just let her do. She wanted a couple quarter pounders, and I'm like, hey, no problem, you can go for it. Well, he took notice of her, and he comes up to me and he says, well, is she supposed? I said, she's one of us. She works here.
Yeah.
If she comes back there, she's part of our team.
Yeah. You guys help each other out.
Exactly.
Well, you know, that's the one thing we did
but
find out is you
here's-
guys are her family here. I just want to let you know that.
Yes, we loved Crystal. But then, a few nights after that, she got into a fight. That man got into a fight